South Africans are remembering the complicated life of Winnie Mandela. The fiery advocate fought against apartheid with her one-time husband, Nelson Mandela. She was also a polarizing figure, frequently caught up in scandal and controversy. Ron Charles has details.
Winnie Mandela was a woman with two clashing personas. One, the stoic face of the anti-apartheid movement during the 27 years her husband Nelson Mandela was in prison.
My husband has been fighting for the liberation of the African people.
The other, a controlling figure accused of ideological thuggery and involvement in the kidnapping and violent murder of activists who crossed her. Today, South Africa's government remembered her sacrifices.
Mrs. Mandela was one of the greatest icons of the struggle against apartheid. She fought valiantly against apartheid state and sacrificed her whole life for the freedom of her country.
The failure of our government.
Mandela had been a lifelong activist. She met Nelson Mandela in 1957. They married and had two daughters. But within 6 years, Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life in prison for leading the fight against apartheid. That's when Winnie Mandela picked up the torch. But she was also remembered for her brutal tactics and her bodyguards, the Mandela United Football Club, whose members used violence to enforce her hard line in the township of Soweto. Mandela was convicted of conspiracy to kidnap and as an accessory after the fact to assault in the 1989 murder of 14-year-old activist Stompie Sepe. Her 6-year sentence was reduced to a fine. A year later, she was there when Nelson Mandela was released from prison. But the two disagreed over his efforts at reconciliation with the white minority. They divorced in 1996, soon after he became South Africa's first black president, an achievement in which she played a significant role. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, my next two guests had the opportunity to meet Winnie Mandela back in 1981. Joining me in studio is Irving Hexham and his son, Jeremy. Thank you both for coming in.
Thank you very much for having us.
So, Jeremy, let's start with you. How did you come to meet her?
Well, in 1977, Winnie Mandela had been banned to Brandford. That meant the government was tired of her antics and sent her away to the middle of nowhere. So put this in perspective, she was living in Okotoks and she got sent to Two Hills, Alberta. And this outraged my grandmother, who was an anti-apartheid activist, so much that she actually wrote to Winnie Mandela. At the time, nobody knew where Winnie was, and she addressed it to the Special Branch, which was the South African police. And they delivered the letter, and she ended up having correspondence with Winnie Mandela until her death in 1981. And we'd gone over to South Africa for my grandmother's funeral, and a bit of a family trip, and we had the opportunity to meet her one day.
So what do you remember about that?
Not a lot. I was 5 at the time. It was a field. I remember that we weren't allowed to get too close to her. We have a photograph of the 3 of us taken by my father, and that was already breaking the law because she was only allowed to be with 2 people at any one time. So we did the photographs, we met her, and then my sister and I went off and played as my dad and mother had conversations with her about what was going on in South Africa.
So, yeah, as you mentioned, you took this picture of her with your children.
Yes.
What was your impression of her?
Oh, I liked her. She was a very nice, very intelligent, well-spoken person. She had a very good grasp of politics. She told some horrific stories, though, because she'd been treated very badly. People had tried to drive her off the road to cause a car crash. And whether this was done by the security police or whether it was done by white extremists or even rival blacks, one doesn't really know. But she was put under an awful lot of pressure, and she was living in this very isolated and remote area in a very dingy little house. But she was in good spirits, and then a couple of years later, of course, she walked away from it all and shocked the world, and the South African government didn't do anything. So she was able to re-establish herself.
What was the political climate like at that time when you were there?
Political climate was tense. A lot of Afrikaners still believed in apartheid. It was before the real disintegration had begun. But there was also a clampdown. It was after the Soweto riots and things like this, and she was seen as a troublemaker, and they were going to punish her, and she was living under pretty grim conditions, actually. I mean, you know, I said a little house. It was had very few facilities. I don't think they'd running water in the house. I don't quite remember that correctly, but I know it was very poor conditions. And of course, as Jeremy says, she was banned and she could only meet with 2 people at once. And so 2 adults and 2 children are 4 people, which created something of a problem. So we had to watch things like that because you knew you were being watched all the time. And after we left, we were followed by a car, and then we went actually to Lesotho. And when we got to the border, the South African police searched our car very, very thoroughly.
Now, she had a lot of detractors as well. I understand you feel somewhat sympathetic towards her. Well, why is that?
Yeah, I do feel somewhat sympathetic, and I think the fact is people never understood what she was going through or what happened. Like, how would you feel if someone knocked on your door at 2 in the morning, said you have an hour to pack your things, and you just disappear? A lot of white South Africans feared her, but no one really got to understand her, not to know her, know what the struggle was she was going through. She was just seen as a troublemaker, and so I do have that sympathy for her.
Well, really fascinating.